My front door didn't just open, it shattered. Splinters flew past my face, and Karen Bradley stormed in with a crowbar like she thought she was raiding a meth lab. I hadn't even finished pouring coffee for the retired judge sitting quietly at my kitchen table. You ever hit a point in life where you're not really sure if you're burnt out or just done? That was me. I'd been grinding in tech for over a decade, freelancing, building iOS apps for clients who somehow always needed things yesterday, managing remote teams, debugging code at 3 in the morning. On paper, I was doing fine. Comfortable income, cool projects, a loft in Austin with exposed brick and everything. But I couldn't shake this constant buzz in my chest like I was permanently in a fight-or-flight loop. My dad passing just cracked the whole thing open. It was sudden, heart attack, no warnings, no hospital stay, just gone. And maybe that's what made it worse. There wasn't time to say anything. Not that we were super close or anything, but losing him felt like someone ripped a support beam out of my life. A couple weeks after the funeral, I opened a letter from our family lawyer, and it turns out the cabin, this old place way up in the Colorado mountains that belonged to my grandma, was now mine. I hadn't been up there since I was a kid. I remembered pine trees, thick snowbanks, and my grandma baking blueberry muffins at 6 a.m. sharp like it was a religion. But in that moment, it felt like a way out. So I packed up my stuff, shut down all my freelance contracts, told everyone I needed some offline time, which in tech circles basically means you've either gone insane or discovered ayahuasca, and drove north. The deeper I got into the mountains, the more that noise in my chest quieted, and when I pulled up to the cabin, covered in pine needles with its red metal roof and wraparound porch, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Silence. Real silence. No cars, no city hum, no Slack notifications. Just wind through trees and the occasional bird with boundary issues. The place was in surprisingly good shape. My grandma Ella, God bless her, must have kept it in working order even after moving full-time to Arizona. Everything had that cozy but sturdy feel. Thick wooden beams, creaky floorboards, a fireplace big enough to roast a wild boar if I got really ambitious. It smelled like cedar, old books, and a lifetime of coffee. There was something sacred about it, not in a religious sense, but like, this was the last real thing left in my life that hadn't been optimized or monetized or over-engineered. Just a house built by hands, in a place where the world couldn't touch me. I could breathe here. The cabin came with a lot of my grandma's stuff still in it. Her rocking chair was in its usual corner by the window. The kitchen had all her old mugs, including the one that said, "Do not disturb unless you're bleeding." And the bedroom had a nightstand full of crossword puzzles, half-finished novels, and a bottle of gin tucked underneath like a little secret. The whole place felt alive with her, like she'd just stepped out to water the garden. I moved in slow, cleaned things up, fixed the leak in the roof, got the well pump working again, bought a decent Wi-Fi rig because I might be retreating from the world, but I wasn't trying to live in 1950. Rebuilt my desk by the big window so I could code while watching the morning mist burn off the treetops. It felt good, honest, like I was finally doing something that made sense. About a week after I moved in, I got a knock on the door. That's when I met her. Karen Bradley. Now listen, I know the internet's basically turned Karen into a meme, but this woman redefined it. She was tall, impeccably put together, with a platinum blonde bob that looked like it required weekly maintenance and a voice that smiled while stabbing you in the kidneys. She introduced herself as the president of the Pine Heights Homeowners Association and handed me a printed welcome packet thicker than a college textbook. I remember staring at the packet, then looking behind me at the cabin like, "Ma'am, I'm literally in the woods." Turns out the area had been rezoned into some kind of gated mountain community project over the last decade, and while my grandma's cabin had technically been grandfathered into it, it was still within the zone of moral oversight, whatever the hell that meant. Karen didn't blink when she said it either. She believed every word like it came from the HOA Bible. She smiled that tight realtor smile and said she just wanted to make sure I knew the expectations. Then she mentioned something about mailbox regulations and approved exterior paint colors and how there were specific policies around lawn decor that weren't immediately apparent to outsiders. I should have known right then. That was the moment. That was the little crack in the wall. But I was still high off peace and pine trees and the idea that maybe humanity was decent up here. So I thanked her, told her I'd review the packet, and went back to sanding down an old cedar bench I found behind the shed. What I didn't know yet, what no one knew, was that Karen had a plan, a long game, and I had just inherited the one thing that stood in her way. I was the last dot on her map, and she was just getting started. A few weeks after that welcome packet incident, I found an envelope wedged under my doormat. No stamp, no postmark, just folded clean and tight like it had been hand-delivered by someone who wanted me to know they were watching. Inside was a letter with the HOA header on top, all formal and official sounding. But the actual contents? Karen was giving me a first warning about a violation. The violation? My front porch. Specifically, the old rocking chair sitting on it. Now, I don't mean it was broken or anything. It was solid oak, smooth from years of use, with this deep creak that felt like home every time you sat in it. My grandpa had built that thing with his own hands back in the 60s, sanded it down with nothing but elbow grease and patience. I used to sit on his lap in it when I was 4, watching deer in the trees and pretending we could talk to birds. It was more than just furniture. That chair was a living piece of memory. Family, legacy, comfort, all of it. But according to Karen, it violated community visual standards. No further explanation, just a notice that it didn't meet the design cohesion guidelines established in Section 4B of the HOA Codebook, and a suggestion that it be removed within 10 days to avoid potential citation. I remember just staring at the letter for a solid minute, then laughing out loud like a lunatic on my own porch. I even looked around like maybe someone was hiding in the bushes filming my reaction for some prank channel, but nope, just the wind and the birds and the distant sound of a squirrel trying to kill itself on the power lines. I figured fine, maybe she's just one of those hyper-focused HOA types, maybe she's bored. I mean, if her biggest problem in life is a rocking chair, then hey, good for her. I folded the letter in half, stuck it in a drawer, and forgot about it. Well, not forgot exactly, more like chose to ignore. I wasn't going to let some over-caffeinated clipboard warrior tell me what kind of furniture I could or couldn't have on my own damn porch. This wasn't a subdivision in Scottsdale. This was a cabin on the side of a mountain. 2 days later, I found another note. Same envelope, same letterhead. But this time, it was stamped second notice in bold red ink. And this one had a fine attached. A fine for a chair. I don't know what snapped in me right then, but I didn't laugh this time. I just stood there on the porch holding the paper, staring at the chair like it had just betrayed me. I knew what this was. It wasn't about aesthetics, it wasn't about harmony or whatever flowery language she'd used in her weird little HOA gospel. It was about control. She wanted to see if I'd roll over, if I'd flinch, if she could push me a little and I'd start backing up. Thing is, I don't do well with power games, especially ones that start small. Because small things are never just small things with people like her. They're tests. And I'd seen this kind of manipulation before. Passive-aggressive on the surface, surgical underneath. First they test the porch, then the siding, then your entire reason for living there. So I did the one thing I knew would piss her off the most. I left the chair exactly where it was, but I added something new, a pillow, bright red, with the word "Nope" stitched across the middle, just to make sure she knew I got her message, and that I was sending one back. I wish I could say the chair was the end of it, that I put my little red "Nope" pillow out there and Karen Bradley got the message and found someone else's porch to micromanage, but that would be giving her way too much credit. No, what I'd done, without even realizing it, was step into a game she'd been playing for years. I just didn't know the rules yet. The first escalation came in the form of an official HOA newsletter. Looked innocent enough. Glossy print, color photos, the kind of thing retirees put together with clip art and too much time. I almost tossed it without reading, but something about the tone in Karen's president's note felt off. The language was vague, but the message was clear. Unfortunately, some new residents are unfamiliar with the community standards and may require firm reminders of the values that make Pine Heights a harmonious place to live. Firm reminders, right. That was code for "I'm about to make your life hell." And she did. Within a week, I got another notice. This one said I was in violation for using non-compliant lighting fixtures. I had installed a new porch light from Home Depot. Matte black, vintage style, nothing wild. It looked like it belonged on a cabin. But apparently, according to Section 9 something something, it clashed with the community-approved visual palette. Then came the thing with the bird feeder. I'd hung a little feeder out back. Nothing fancy, just a small cedar box on a chain, filled it with sunflower seeds. The jays and chickadees loved it. So did I. Sitting out there in the morning, drinking coffee, watching the birds flutter in and out, it was peace. But Karen apparently decided it was a violation of wildlife feeding regulations. I got dinged again. She was getting bolder. The fines started piling up. $50 here, $100 there. At first, I laughed it off. What was she going to do? Repo my firewood. But then she sent a certified letter saying I had 10 unresolved infractions totaling $950 and threatening a lien on the property if I didn't pay. That's when the tone changed for me. It stopped being funny. I tried to reach out. Emailed the HOA board. No response. Called the number on the letterhead, voicemail. I even showed up at the little HOA office next to the community pool, which, by the way, was padlocked and looked like no one had used it in 5 years. But the door was locked and the blinds were closed. It felt like trying to argue with a brick wall. A smug, pastel-painted, regulation-compliant brick wall. Then things got weird. One morning, I walked out to get the mail and saw 2 men in khaki shirts standing in front of my porch, clipboard in hand. They weren't from the city or the county, no badges, no ID, just beige polos with Pine Heights HOA compliance team embroidered on the chest in green script. They were measuring my deck, literally standing there with tape measures and laser pointers discussing railing height irregularities like they were solving the JFK assassination. I asked who sent them. One of them mumbled something about Karen's directive. The other avoided eye contact and kept writing notes on his clipboard. Later that night, I found a violation notice rubber banded to my doorknob. Said my deck exceeded permitted dimensions by 7 inches and would need to be modified or removed. That deck had been there since the 70s. I'd checked the survey and the county records. But facts didn't matter in Karen's world. She had declared war, and she didn't need a reason. Just a target. People started treating me differently, too. Neighbors I'd waved at a dozen times suddenly avoided eye contact. One guy I'd helped dig out of a snowdrift a month earlier crossed the street when he saw me coming. It was like Karen had sent out a silent bulletin that I was non-compliant and should be avoided for everyone's safety. Then came the cameras. I noticed them one morning, 2 small black boxes mounted on a telephone pole facing my driveway. Tiny, but they had infrared sensors. One of them even followed movement. I couldn't prove who installed them, but come on, I hadn't seen a single other camera on any other house on the road, and that wasn't the only new hardware. My internet got choppy, then it stopped working altogether. I called my ISP and they said someone had reported unauthorized equipment on the utility pole and requested service suspension for my address. Except I hadn't, and they had no record of who had called. I had to drive into town just to get back online and send client updates. That's when I realized this wasn't just about breaking me down with fines. Karen was trying to isolate me, control the flow of information, shut off my ability to push back. Still, I kept my cool. I documented everything, screenshotted every notice, took photos of the cameras, saved voicemail transcripts, and yeah, I installed my own security cams, real ones that fed to a backup drive and the cloud. I wasn't about to let someone catch me off guard. But then she crossed the line. I came home one afternoon and noticed the padlock on my shed was missing. The door was cracked open. I didn't keep much in there, just tools, some old furniture, a generator, but still. It felt like a violation, a break-in. Someone had gone through my stuff. A few things were moved, but nothing stolen. It wasn't robbery, it was a message. I changed the locks, upgraded to a keypad entry, set motion alerts on my cameras. I also started losing sleep. I'd lie in bed at night listening for footsteps. Every creak made my skin crawl. I'd check my phone obsessively, reread notices, scroll back through camera logs. I stopped working on projects. Missed deadlines. My clients started drifting. I didn't even care. Karen had gotten under my skin, not just as a bureaucrat, but as a presence, an intruder, a ghost that haunted my land with paperwork and power trips. And then, one morning, I walked out to get my mail and found a bright pink notice stapled to my front gate. It said I was being summoned to an emergency HOA disciplinary review, and that the committee would be arriving on site to execute compliance protocols. Execute what now? I didn't know it yet, but that was the day everything broke wide open. That was the day she brought the crowbar. After that pink notice, something in me flipped. Not anger, not yet. It was more like a quiet, simmering disbelief. I mean, sure, I knew Karen was pushing things. But this? An on-site compliance execution? It sounded like the kind of thing you'd hear in a dystopian novel where neighbors get dragged into re-education camps because their mailbox flag was crooked. I wasn't just annoyed anymore, I was shaken. Not because I thought she could actually do anything legal, at least I didn't think so, but because she acted like the law didn't apply to her at all. Like she was the sheriff, the judge, and the jury of a town she'd appointed herself queen of. I decided I was done being passive. I was going to do this the right way. Clean, legal, documented. So I started with the most logical step. I called the police, explained the whole situation, briefly, clearly, the chair, the fines, the cameras, the shed, the threats, the pink notice, the looming compliance protocol. I figured any halfway decent cop would hear that and at least come take a look. The guy I talked to sounded like he was filing his nails during the call. Said something like, "Sounds like a civil matter between you and the HOA, sir. We don't usually get involved unless there's a safety issue." I asked, "What about breaking and entering?" "The shed? Did you see anyone actually go in?" "No, but—" "Then there's no suspect to pursue. You can file a report, but we probably won't be able to do much." I hung up feeling like I just tried reporting a home invasion to the DMV. All right, I thought, fine, let's go higher. I called a lawyer, found a local guy with good reviews online, had a pine tree in his logo. That felt reassuring for some reason. I set up a consultation, drove into town, brought every letter, fine, photo, screenshot, everything I had. The lawyer, Mr. Griffin, was probably in his 60s, wore a bolo tie, and had one of those voices that sounded permanently exhausted. He listened patiently as I laid everything out. Didn't interrupt, didn't react, just nodded occasionally and took a few notes with a pen that looked older than me. When I finished, he sighed and leaned back in his creaky office chair. "Well," he said, "I'll be honest with you, Nick. This isn't the first time I've heard about Karen Bradley. She's persistent." I asked what I could do, how we could stop this. He scratched his chin. "The tricky thing about HOAs is they're technically private corporations, so while they have to follow state and federal law, they're not held to the same standards of transparency. You'd be surprised how much power they have if the bylaws are written just right." I asked if there was a way to sue them. Or her. He nodded slowly. "There is, but it'll be expensive and slow, and if you're not ready for a year or two of paperwork, discovery, court dates, and constant headaches, well, I'd understand if you wanted to just sell and walk." That last part hit me in the chest like a gut punch. Sell and walk. He meant well, I think, but that advice felt like surrender. I thanked him, paid the consultation fee, and left. Drove halfway home, pulled over near the trailhead overlook, and just sat there staring at the mountains for a long time. Selling wasn't an option. This place was all I had left of my family, of quiet, of sanity. This cabin wasn't just real estate, it was legacy. It was my grandma's laugh echoing off the rafters, my grandpa's toolbox still hanging in the shed, a million things that didn't show up on a Zillow listing. Still, I wasn't done trying. Next, I reached out to the county. Zoning office, building codes, property assessment. I wanted to know every law and statute that applied to my land. Spent hours reading through documents so dry they could have been used as fire starter. Made calls, asked questions. What I found was frustrating. Technically, yes, the HOA existed. Yes, it had been registered properly. And yes, they had legal authority over aesthetic regulations as long as they didn't violate state housing codes. But here's the kicker. My cabin, my exact property, was listed in an old county archive as non-conforming historical structure, meaning it was built before the HOA was even a twinkle in Karen's tyrant eye. That felt important, but I didn't fully understand how important. Not yet. Meanwhile, I figured I'd try appealing to people. Real people. The neighbors. I started with one of the older couples down the road, Ron and Lydia. I remembered them from childhood visits. They used to grow raspberries and had a golden retriever that barked at snowflakes. I brought over a pie, literal olive branch stuff. We sat on their porch. They were polite but careful, like they were waiting to see if I was wearing a wire. Lydia leaned in at one point and whispered, "We know what she's like. But be careful. She doesn't like being embarrassed." That was the theme, talking to neighbors. Everyone knew. They'd all had some kind of run-in. A dispute over wind chimes, a citation for unapproved lawn ornamentation. Someone else got fined for parking a truck in their own driveway because it had a business decal on it. But no one wanted to go on record. Karen had somehow convinced the community that fighting back meant becoming a pariah. I sent letters to the HOA board. No reply. I emailed the county commissioner. Got an auto response. I even emailed a local newspaper columnist, hoping they'd sniff a good story. Nothing. At night, I'd lay in bed thinking about that pink notice, wondering what she meant by on-site execution. My anxiety was cranked so high I could hear it humming in my teeth. The whole thing felt surreal, like I'd been sucked into some dark satire of suburban life. And still, I kept telling myself, it's gonna be fine. Just hang in there. Don't escalate. Play it smart. You're right. The law is on your side. That hope, that stupid, stubborn hope, kept me going a little longer. But deep down, I think I already knew the truth. This wasn't going away. She wasn't going to stop. Not until something broke. I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone with that kind of dead-eyed stare you get after too many nights of no real sleep, when I heard the door creak behind me. I didn't flinch, not anymore. Every sound out here had me on edge, but I was getting good at pretending it didn't. "You know," a voice said, cool and calm, "if this were a proper court of law, that woman would have been disbarred twice over by now." I turned. Cynthia Morrow, Judge Cynthia Morrow, retired federal bench, was standing in my living room, barefoot, with a mug of tea in her hand like she owned the place. Which technically she kinda did. I mean, she'd been staying with me for a while at that point, laying low while she worked on some personal legal memoir she didn't want anyone seeing early. Old friend of my grandmother's. Sharp as a scalpel, dry as dust, not the kind of person who commented on things lightly. "You talking about Karen?" I asked. She raised one perfectly arched eyebrow. "Who else do you know who swings a crowbar like it's part of parliamentary procedure?" That made me laugh, the kind that's mostly a grunt. So what, I just wait for her to actually break something next time? Hope she slips up bad enough to get caught? Cynthia sat down across from me and slid a folder onto the table. Yellowed, worn, familiar. It was from my grandmother's filing cabinet. "I figured it was time you saw this," she said. "Ella didn't want to involve you back then. Thought it was safer, but I think it's relevant now." I opened the folder, not expecting much. Just old property stuff, I figured. What I found made my stomach flip. Inside was a deed. Not just any deed, but one dated back to 1952, stamped and signed by the county registrar. It listed the property boundaries in exact detail, but the real kicker was the language at the bottom. There was a clause, small, handwritten, notarized, that said the land had been designated a protected historical homestead due to pre-existing structure and veteran settlement status. In other words, my grandpa's cabin was legally outside the reach of any HOA that formed after that year, including Karen's. "You've had this the whole time?" I asked. Cynthia nodded slowly. "Ella kept copies. She also had that added clause written in by the county judge back then. I doubt even Karen knows it exists." I just sat there, stunned, not quite processing, but she wasn't done. "That's not the only thing," Cynthia said, leaning in slightly. "Do you know why Karen really lost her law license?" I blinked. "Wasn't it some fraud thing?" She smiled like a teacher about to drop a quiz. "It was more than that. She was running a real estate scam, intimidating owners to sell, using HOA pressure to devalue homes and snatch them up through shell companies. Your grandmother caught her. I presided over the hearing. We buried her career." That landed like a slap. Everything suddenly made a different kind of sense. "This is personal," I said. "This has been personal the whole time." "Very," she replied. "She sees this place as the one loose thread she never got to cut." I stood up, started pacing. All this time, I'd thought she was just a power-tripping bureaucrat with a clipboard and a god complex. But she wasn't just running some overzealous HOA. She was running a long con. And this cabin, my cabin, was the last domino that had refused to fall. If she could get me out, she could absorb the land, finish her development plan, and rewrite the whole history of what happened between her and Ella. "But wait," I said. "If this clause protects the cabin, why hasn't anyone said anything?" Cynthia gave me a look like I'd just asked if birds have knees. Because no one's looked. Everyone's so caught up in her showmanship that they forget to dig. That hit me hard. I'd been flailing, reacting, surviving, but never really investigating, never really asking why she was going so hard. And now, here it was. All of it. Right under my nose. Still, one thing bugged me. "Okay," I said, "so I've got this document. What's to stop her from just ignoring it, like she ignores everything else?" Cynthia's eyes sparkled in that very specific way old judges do when they know something you don't. "That's where your friend Tommy comes in," she said. And almost on cue, my phone buzzed. Text from Tommy. "Brother, you're gonna want to see this. Call me ASAP. Game changer." Turns out, while I'd been wrestling with HOA violations and internet outages, Tommy had been quietly capturing everything on backup streams. Karen's little committee meetings, her speeches, her calls with contractors. One clip in particular stood out. In it, Karen was on the phone with someone, probably a developer, saying, "We just need the Sanders property gone. Once that's done, we can push the rezoning. No one's left to object." Boom. Intent, motive, timeline. With the deed in my hand and that clip in Tommy's, it was like two pieces of a map snapping together. Suddenly, I wasn't just a guy being bullied by a bored HOA president. I was the key to a much bigger puzzle, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel cornered anymore. I felt dangerous. Once the dust settled, and by dust I mean the full realization that Karen had basically built her empire on smoke, mirrors, and intimidation, I sat on the porch with that old rocking chair creaking beneath me, the deed clutched in one hand and my phone in the other. Tommy was on the other end, speaking a mile a minute. "This is your nuke, man. She has no jurisdiction over your land. She's been bluffing the whole time. But we can't just send a letter and expect her to fold. We need a move that's so loud, so public, that even if she wanted to weasel out of it, she couldn't. And I was right there with him. Not just because of the technical stuff, the legal footing, the documents, but because I was done letting her write the narrative. If she wanted a show, I was going to give her one. But this time, I'd be holding the mic and the spotlight. I looped Cynthia in, naturally. She wasn't just staying in the cabin now, she was becoming something like a war general. Calm, calculated, and scary prepared. She had her own reasons, too. Karen humiliated herself in Cynthia's courtroom once, but clearly hadn't learned a damn thing from the experience. And then, like some kind of divine wildcard from a spy novel, came Mary. Agent Mary Hartley, my unassuming septuagenarian neighbor with the rose bushes and hummingbird feeders. I hadn't even known her last name until she knocked on my door with a burner phone and a folder thicker than a Bible. "You're not the only one Karen's been targeting," she told me just like that. "I've been watching her since she took over the HOA. I couldn't intervene directly, not until something actionable showed up." She placed Tommy's video clips and my deed on the table like puzzle pieces. "Well," she said, this is actionable. You ever feel like the universe suddenly starts aligning for you? That's what it felt like the tide turned and all the chaos started pointing toward something deliberate. For the first time in months, I wasn't reacting. I was planning. We didn't want just a legal win. We wanted to expose her. Because taking her to court, that could be buried in motions and continuances for years. But if we dragged her mess out into the sunlight, that was different. That was irreversible. So we came up with the idea. A public HOA meeting. A special session. We'd call it ourselves, invoke the right under the bylaw that allowed homeowners to request a hearing if they had material grievances. Karen had been so used to controlling the agenda that I don't think it even occurred to her anyone might use the rules against her. Cynthia wrote up the request. Tommy posted a copy on the HOA community board and included a QR code linking to a concerned neighbor's site we set up. A couple of residents joined quietly. Not vocal support. No one wanted to be targeted like I was, but enough to get quorum. Meanwhile, Mary compiled a neat little package of financial irregularities from HOA dues, money that had been funneled into consulting services, which didn't seem to exist. If you knew where to look, the paper trail screamed money laundering. It wasn't enough to convict, but it was enough to make anyone watching start asking questions. Tommy rigged a full live stream setup, cameras hidden in light fixtures, backup batteries. He even had a Wi-Fi booster hidden in an old birdhouse on a pole outside the meeting hall. This wasn't going to be a neighborhood discussion. This was going to be a broadcast. We looped in Walt, too, Officer Walt Simmons, the guy Karen had wrapped around her finger for months. He looked like he wanted to crawl out of his own skin when Cynthia showed him what we had, especially the threats Karen had made to his family, caught on Tommy's recordings. "I never signed up for this," he said, eyes wide, voice cracking. "I just wanted to keep things quiet." "Well," Cynthia said, sipping her tea, "you can keep it quiet, or you can help us make it right." He agreed to show up, said he'd speak if it came to that. Still not sure if it was bravery or just guilt, but either way, we had him. The plan was simple, really. Let Karen walk into that meeting thinking she was still the queen of the hill. Let her run the room, soak up the attention. Then turn on the lights, play the tapes, drop the documents. Let her unravel herself in front of the very people she's been using as pawns. We didn't tell everyone. The fewer people who knew, the safer the plan stayed. But I'll be honest, those last couple days leading up to the meeting, I barely slept. My nerves were on fire. There's something surreal about knowing you're going to war, but instead of armor, you're carrying USB sticks and notarized land deeds. Still, deep down, I had this weird calm growing inside me, like all the fear had burned off, and now there was just this cold, focused clarity. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about truth. It was about protecting what mattered. And most of all, it was about finally standing up, not just for me, but for every quiet neighbor who'd ever been too scared to challenge someone like Karen. Because if we pulled this off, she'd never control anyone again. The community hall looked like a rustic church converted into a town hall on a budget. Wooden beams, folding chairs, a sad little stage with a podium that leaned slightly to the left like it had given up. The kind of place that smelled faintly of old coffee and Lysol. It was the last place you'd expect a showdown, but that's exactly what it turned into. Karen showed up dressed like she was about to accept an award. Hair blown out, heels clacking on hardwood, some sort of flowy scarf situation happening like she was auditioning for the role of benevolent dictator. She smiled at people, nodded graciously, even hugged someone's wife. The show was in full swing. She hadn't seen me yet. I was tucked in the back, helping Tommy with the camera feeds. Cynthia sat a few rows up, calm and unreadable, like this was just another day in court. Mary stood near the emergency exit, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room like she was back in the field. People trickled in. Some looked curious. A few clearly looked nervous. One guy wouldn't make eye contact at all, but the seats filled. And then Karen took the podium. She started with a monologue. Of course she did. Talked about the importance of shared values, how unity begins with trust, how disruptive forces threaten the fabric of community. I almost choked on my water. It was all deflection and spin. She painted herself as the misunderstood guardian, trying to protect the neighborhood from me. She even tossed in a passive-aggressive jab. Some individuals seem to think this is about personal vendettas. I assure you, nothing could be further from the truth. That's when I stood up. The room went quiet. Karen froze. Actually, I said, walking slowly toward the front, it is personal. Tommy hit the switch. The projector lit up behind her. The screen flared to life with a paused video frame. Karen, mid-sentence on a phone call, her expression just smug enough to make your skin crawl. She turned to look at it, blinking, and I saw the exact second her stomach dropped. Then the audio played. We just need the Sanders property gone. Once that's done, we can push the rezoning. No one's left to object. The silence in the room was suffocating. Karen spun back toward me, already on defense. That was taken out of context, she snapped, voice cracking. I was discussing hypothetical planning scenarios, community growth. Tommy didn't even blink. There's more, he said, and queued up another clip. This one showed her meeting with a contractor in a parking lot, talking about evictions, fast-tracking permits, and how some of the old folks won't even know what hit them. She tried to shout over it, but by now the room wasn't listening to her anymore. Then Cynthia stood. She walked slowly to the front, pulled a document from her purse, and placed it on the podium. This, she said, her voice crisp and precise, is the original deed to the Sanders property, dated and notarized in 1952. This land has been exempt from HOA jurisdiction since before your organization even existed. Karen stared at it like it was written in another language. Furthermore, Cynthia continued, the homeowner has every right to remain. Your actions have been unlawful. Intimidation, trespassing, property damage. Karen tried to interrupt, but the sound of her voice had turned to static. Nobody believed her anymore. And then, icing on the insanity cake, Officer Walt Simmons stepped up from the side of the room. He wasn't in uniform, just jeans, flannel, and the look of a man whose conscience had finally caught up with him. I need to speak, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Karen turned slowly like she didn't believe it was real. I've been complicit, Walt said. I ignored complaints. I downplayed reports. I looked the other way because I was afraid of what she'd do to my family. He looked at me, then at the crowd. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Karen lost it. You can't do this, she shrieked. This is a setup. They're lying. She's lying. She pointed wildly at Cynthia. She has a vendetta against me. This is all fabricated. Then she turned to Tommy. You think this makes you a hero? You're all going to regret this. I built this community. The cameras caught every second of her meltdown. People were filming on their phones now, some live streaming. Her voice echoed around the room, raw and panicked, no longer composed or elegant, just loud and unraveling. That's when Mary stepped forward, not from the side, from the back, calmly, like she'd just remembered she left something on the stove. She pulled a badge from her pocket, not flashy, just enough to silence the entire room. Mary Hartley, retired bureau. This meeting is being documented under full consent of attendees. All materials are being forwarded to state authorities and, she paused, for effect, federal investigators. Karen didn't say another word. She just stood there, jaw clenched, eyes darting. For once, she didn't have a script. And I swear, in that moment, you could actually hear her power deflate, not explode, deflate, like a balloon that had sprung a leak somewhere you couldn't patch. And just like that, the show was over. The silence after Mary's words was the loudest moment I've ever experienced. Karen didn't scream again, didn't move, didn't even blink. She just stood there, paralyzed, while the room around her transformed. People started murmuring. Not whispers anymore, actual voices, actual questions. You could see the shift on their faces. They weren't looking at me like I was the town pariah anymore. They weren't afraid of her. They were curious, then shocked, then angry, and then the dam broke. A woman from the back, Darla, I think her name was, stood up and said, "Wait, are you saying our dues were being funneled into fake accounts?" Tommy nodded. We traced multiple payments to shell companies. One of them was registered to a P.O. box in Vegas. It's all documented. Another guy, Jeff, maybe, spoke next. You said you needed more fees for landscaping and road maintenance. Our road hasn't been resurfaced in 3 years. Karen tried to interject, but Mary casually lifted her phone and said, "Karen, you may want to hold off. Anything you say right now can and will be included in the active report." Cynthia stepped to the podium one last time. "I'd like to motion for a formal vote," she said calmly, "effective immediately, that the current board of the HOA be dissolved due to fiduciary misconduct, breach of bylaw, and abuse of power." And just like that, hands started rising. Some were hesitant, others went up like fists. Karen didn't move. She just stood there like the scaffolding of her life had collapsed in on itself. One of the neighbors, I think it was old Rick from down the road, walked up, reached into his coat, and slapped a folded piece of paper on the podium. "Here's my vote, and I want my damn money back." Tommy streamed the whole thing live. By the time the vote finished, we had over 90,000 people watching. Comments were flying in. People couldn't believe this was real. Within hours, local news picked it up. Corrupt HOA leader exposed in live stream takedown. Next day, it hit the regional press. Denver Post, KMGH. Even NPR did a short segment quoting Cynthia and referencing a retired federal judge and an ex-FBI agent uniting with a freelance developer to take down a neighborhood tyrant. I couldn't make that up if I tried. A few days later, Karen was arrested. Charges ranged from wire fraud to criminal conspiracy. The FBI had been handed the full file, thanks to Mary, who disappeared just as casually as she'd entered the story. One day she was trimming her hedges, the next her house was for sale and the windows were empty. The HOA was put under state review. A temporary manager was assigned. Eventually they disbanded it altogether. Too much corruption, too much liability. Our little mountain community became one of the few HOA-free zones in the entire county. And my cabin officially declared outside HOA jurisdiction. Historical landmark protections renewed, all Karen's claims voided. But what stuck with me most wasn't the legal stuff. It was watching the faces of people who'd been too scared to speak finally breathe again, like the spell had broken, like we'd woken up from a long collective bad dream. For the first time since I moved up there, folks actually waved to me when they passed my driveway. A couple brought over pie. One lady even offered to paint me a new mailbox. I politely declined. I was keeping my old one, the one Karen hated the most. Life got quiet again, not in the eerie, something's about to go wrong way, just genuinely, peacefully quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your coffee taste better and lets you hear the wind playing through the pines without wondering if someone's watching you through binoculars from a board meeting. I still wake up early, still make my coffee on that same rattling stove my granddad installed 50 years ago. Still take my walks, boots crunching on frost or dry pine needles, depending on the season. But something's different now. I don't flinch when I hear tires on gravel. I don't brace myself for confrontation when the mail truck rolls up. I don't double-check my deed every week like it's going to vanish out of nowhere. The cabin feels more like home than ever. And not just because it's mine legally now, but because I fought for it. I earned it. Every beam, every creaky step, every dent in the porch railing means more now. Because I didn't let someone like Karen erase it. Cynthia still visits from time to time. She brought me a bottle of bourbon as a "congratulations, you survived the HOA" gift. We drank it on the porch, watching the sunset light the ridge on fire. She said she hadn't felt that kind of justice in a long time. I told her I hadn't either. Tommy got hired by a startup doing digital compliance consulting. Apparently blowing the lid off corrupt HOAs is a pretty solid resume booster. He still checks in now and then, usually just to say, "Dude, you wouldn't believe what another HOA is trying to pull in Oregon." Even Officer Walt came by once just to say thanks. He was quieter, humbled. I think part of him still carries the weight of looking away for so long. But he looked me in the eye and shook my hand, and that counted for something. Mary? Gone. Vanished like a ghost who finished her haunting and moved on. Her house was bought by a young couple who have no idea who lived there before. They planted tulips where she had her hummingbird feeders. I sometimes wonder if she's watching the news somewhere, sipping black coffee and smiling to herself. The forest hasn't changed. The wind still carries that same cool, piney scent. The deer still wander too close to my vegetable beds. The stars still come out in impossible numbers on clear nights. But I've changed. I'm not the guy who moved up here to hide anymore. I'm not the guy who thought silence was the same thing as peace. And I'm definitely not the guy who lets people like Karen decide how I live. Now, when someone asks what happened, I just smile a little and say, let's just say the HOA tried the wrong cabin. Then I pour another cup of coffee, and I get back to living.